Dennis Drumm, thank you for joining us. We have been able to get some time talking to Dennis about a whole lot of questions that we had that we think would really kind of bring to life some of the kind of the background.
Yeah, the backstory. We like to talk about the backstory sometimes. Yeah. So it's a pleasure to be here, Graham. And hi, by the way. It's good. We'll have a fun conversation. I'm sure there's a world of stories to tell.
Yeah. Vintage this year is celebrating 30 years, which is really a pretty cool thing. Having kind of started off as I suppose a kind of encore plus type thing, really kind of elevating the brand and what you would find in terms of specs. You've been there for the ride, so how do you think things have, I suppose, turned out initial, kind of I suppose expectations versus where you are today?
Along for the ride, more like a roller coaster actually. At some points in that journey it was. Yeah, well, how did it start out? You're right, Graham. We first used the name Vintage on a guitar back in '96 with a very an interesting series of guitars where at the time we were the distributor for Lace products, Lace pickups and such like. We were also the Grover guys, Grover tuners, and Trev Wilkinson's an old mate of mine, so we had a bit of a relationship with him. And we thought, we had such a success with Encore since we introduced that brand name, where it kind of settled down as being, certainly in the UK anyway, the absolute number one entry-level guitar. The number of times people say to me now, 40 years later, my first guitar was an Encore, is actually quite gratifying. But we want to try and push the boat out a little bit more and prove the point that, an inexpensive guitar didn't have to be, let's call it an inexpensive guitar, if we all know what I mean by that comment. So we took the traditional double cut bolt neck thing, and we decided, because we were the Lace sensor distributors here in the UK, we were going to put a set of Lace sensors on there, which are really expensive, high-end pickup. And again, we were the Grover tuner guys, so we put Grover 205s on there, benchmark tuner for the time, still are actually. And because of our relationship with Trevor designed a special bridge for the low end of the guitar market, which was his two-post design, but it had what I could call a fixed intonation plate, the step saddles, the way you set an S-style guitar up. You could still move it back and forwards for a bit of fine tuning. But that was actually quite a low-cost bridge. And we put that on a really good alder body. We made sure that the producer used really good Indian rosewood for the fingerboard, really good maple for the necks. And we produced a kick-ass guitar, which went into the market in '96 for £199. And people very quickly got the idea that guitar, tuners, pickups, bridge, actually the guitar was less than the retail price of the components. So understandably, they sold really quickly. And we got a really good lift in reputation. We got great press, looking back to the days of Music UK and the early Guitarist and all those magazines. We got really, really strong reviews, and we actually surprised ourselves, I'd say. And it was also the first time we'd ever used the word vintage. We called it the Encore Vintage Series. And it worked a treat, sold out really quickly. It was not a limited edition in the sense that we sold it like that, but it was a limited edition in the sense that I think we only bought the components for like 150 of each of 6 models. Yeah. And when they're gone, they're gone. And you do see them pop up occasionally. We don't actually have any in the company in the collection, but I must buy 1 or 2 one day when I see them on eBay.
Keep an eye out.
Keep an eye out, thank you very much. Yeah, so that was the first time we used vintage. And to be perfectly honest about it, 1 or 2 of our dealers, our customers said to us, vintage, that's a great name. Did you ever think about using that? And we thought, no. So we did. We thought, let's try and register it. So we made an application to register the trademark, and bingo, we managed to get a generic word registered as a trademark in the UK Trademark Registry.
Must be like a first as well, though.
I think it was, yeah. And thereafter, I could tell you a story about how we used to do product development. And this would tie in kind of quite nicely, really. Back in the old days, if you weren't the F word or the G word or the R word or the N word, your product development really was go to a factory in Korea, as it was. That was the main manufacturing source at the time, and say, okay, we'll have 1,000 of that shape, 500 of that shape, 200 of that shape, so they don't sell very well. Better have some bases, so stick 400 of those into the container as well, and put our name on it, and that would be, at the time, it would be Encore, and then you'd ship them and you'd sell them. And they'd be okay, they'd be quite good, and they got better year on year. But as time progressed, rock and roll started in the 50s with Elvis, and then it became the Beatles. And then the guitar boom came, the beat boom, and it just exploded. And the demand was massive, so more and more factories set up, and production moved from Japan to Korea to China to Indonesia. A lot of it is now.
Yeah.
But what that meant was more and more guitars got out into the marketplace, more and more people played guitars. Then you got the situation, really interesting, where people started to learn more about how a guitar should be built, what was a good guitar, what wasn't a good guitar.
Yeah.
Alongside that, you had the growing music press, educating people about what should be good, what shouldn't be good, blah, 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 blah. And that was one of the things that drove us from just generic, what we call OEM production, where you go to a factory and say, put our name on it, original equipment manufacturer, drove us away from that, which had been a massive success for us and other guitar companies around the world for a long time.
Yeah.
That drove us to do the Encore vintage guitar in 1996, because we were definitely getting the feel that there's more to do, there's more to this. So that set us off on the vintage path. There was a period between 96 and 2000, and I'm going to say 2004, might have to check that date, 2004, where we did our own product development, and it was based around using generic shapes, gradually making the hardware better, making the pickups better, getting more exact on the styling, details like edge radiuses, all that kind of thing, because people demanded more because they were becoming more knowledgeable. So you had to produce product which fit the demand.
Yeah. It must be difficult as well, because even things like like radius and such, people recognise about these things these days sometimes. It must be such a challenge.
Well, it was a challenge then, but it was a challenge that we rose to by moving away from the Encore generic stuff into that first Encore vintage model. What's 1,000 pieces, I think it was. And then that definitely set us off down the path of, right, let's design. We've got this lovely brand name now. The great thing about a vintage brand name is it is a word that is on the lips of every guitarist in every country, every day, multiple times. Vintage guitars. Is it a confusion? Yeah, sometimes it's a confusion, because are we talking about vintage guitar brand, or are we talking about vintage guitars? Well, we're talking about vintage guitar brand today. So, I'll just talk about that. So we developed various models and and that brings us to the Trev Wilkinson side of the story. Old mate Trev, Englishmen abroad, seeing each other at trade shows and various things around the world for a very long time, actually. Yeah. Good friends, able to say anything to each other, able to rib each other mercilessly sometimes. I showed him friends. Best of friends, yeah.
That's how that goes.
I showed him a guitar in Frankfurt I can't remember the year, it must have been 2003, in a particular shape. And it was our new wonderful model. And he took it off me and said, "Bit heavy, Den." So I said, "Okay, we could do something about that." He said, "Okay." And we chat a few more things about it. We talked about pickups, we talked about what tuners were on it, guitar machine heads were on it. We all do that, don't we? Guitar machine heads. I play the guitar. I'm a bass player. Funny old world. And he walked away from the booth after our conversation, and I kid you not, I could see his shoulders going up and down. So I knew he was laughing. So I said, "Oi, Trev," and his lovely daughter Kate was with him. Come back here. What are you laughing at?" He said, "Well, Den, if I'm being honest, it's crap. It's so far wide of the mark. You think it's wonderful, but it's like, don't do it." So, that was that brief shortening of the conversation, because I didn't quite take it lying down. But the upshot of that was Trev and I got into an arrangement where he came to work for John Hornby Skews, the owner of the vintage brand, as a consultant. And we had the determination then that we'd proven what we could do with the Encore vintage guitar. So we'd proven that we can do so much product development on our own. We'd also just proven to ourselves in the moment in Frankfurt that what we really needed was to bring somebody on board who absolutely had the rock solid knowledge and experience of hardware, guitars, and everything, to make us sit down and redesign the vintage brand, the whole vintage line, in a manner which means that we could put it out into the market and prove what you can do when you use your knowledge honestly, and you use your commercial acumen honestly, and you can produce a great guitar that the best guitar player in the world can use on any soundstage. I know I keep saying that, but it's a thing for me. And we did it. It took us nearly 18 months we redesigned every single guitar. We went right back to basics, back to let's call them original drawings, original templates, so that all the dimensioning was correct, all the radiusing on the boards was correct. We redesigned it. I shouldn't say that. I said Trev. Trev designed a complete range of pickups that we could make inexpensively in the Orient, and all these pickups in all the original vintage guitars, the reissued series as we called it, and they still are today. They're all benchmarked against the most amazing pickups in Trev's quite astonishing library of physical samples of guitars. You walk into his workshop and there's racks, and you pull out this case and you open it and go, where did you get that from? So we have a very, very well-known guitar in vintage called a V52, which is a single cut bolt neck. 52 is the giveaway, it's the year, and we all know what happened in 1952 in Southern California. I'm not going to tell you what her name was though. I wasn't even born then. I'll give myself a small favour. So we call it the V52 because it's based upon that thing from the 52 year. But the pickups that we use in that guitar were designed, benchmarked against the genuine 52 in Trev's library of physical amazing stuff.
That's the amazing thing though, that interaction happened and that you both took the time to invest in all that activity, because it's not cheap to do so much design and to put so much into it. But it was I'd probably say arguably one of the best turning points for the brand in terms of just totally lifting things up, and in terms of...
It wasn't the best turning point, it was the turning point.
Yeah.
It was absolutely the turning point. And it wasn't just Trev and I, you have to bear in mind that, John Skews, the founder of the company, was very, very involved with it. And he, as a businessman with a lot of commercial acumen, an absolute entrepreneur, he looked at the proposal that we put together and said, yeah, I absolutely see the veracity in this, boys. Off you go, let's do it, because we have to plan for the future. Because we learned a long time ago as a company that you can be the distributor of a brand, and this is a slight sidetrack now, guys, but you can be the distributor of a brand, and this has happened to JHS over the years. It does to all distributors, where you do a fantastic job for a brand that you distribute rather than the brand that you own, and then the people that own that brand come along and say to you, well, we don't really like what you're doing, so we're taking that off you. So that was another thing on a commercial level that had pushed us towards being the owner and developer of brands. But for sure, John Skew's decision to stand behind it on a commercial basis, Trev's relationship with me, where, I'm quite a guitar guy, not to his level, but we both knew enough about what each other's capabilities were that he understood how I was going to drive it commercially. I understood how he was going to drive it from a design
tech and specs,
and tech and specs perspective. And also, to be fair, Paul Smith, who's now our MD, had been with us, I think, 3 years at that time, and he's another dyed-in-the-wool guitar guy. And between Trev and I and Paul, we got together to make this triumvirate that really, we spent the next probably 12 months doing all the design work, doing the drawings, designing the pickups, speccing the guitars out, getting the samples from various vendors that we want to get to produce the guitars, visiting factories, saying yes to this, saying no to that. It was a very big project, and then eventually we launched what we called at that time the Vintage Reissued series, which everybody can look back in the history and Britannica, and they can look back at all the brochure archive in the JHS and Vintage and see what we did at that time.
And obviously, why I mentioned the turning points as well is because there's been obviously the reissued series, the Icon series, there's been series here and there like the Metal Axe series and all sorts of things, and then more recently an introduction of like the Coaster series for example's sake, and the Revo series, and that's what I mean by it, I suppose another kind of a turning point, because it's taking things from being the kind of more recognisable shapes and specs to something that basically goes back to vintage with a more affordable, an even more affordable range of the Coaster guitars. Yeah. And obviously the huge number of guitars that are under the Revo series with just that different vibe to things.
Well, you're jumping quite a way forward, obviously, but the reissue we call reissue because that's the bright, shiny, new-looking guitars. Icon came along next because it was driven by one particular single cut fixed neck guitar coming to the market, owned by a very famous guitar player that another very famous guitar player bought, and we thought, well, that'd be interesting. We could do. Never done a serial production distressed guitar before. Let's do that one. Well, that's what everybody now knows as the vintage PGM or the lemon drop, call it what you will. But when I look back, I believe we were actually first to the game with serial production distressed guitars. And that first guitar, the PGM, V100 PGM, we called that Icon series because it was a bit of an icon. It was, an homage to something, shall we say. And again, like the original Encore Vintage thing kicked off the use of the brand Vintage, really doing that single guitar, the lemon drop in the distressed finish, calling it an Icon, was then the precursor to what we then went on and did Icon series, which has now become a really big part of what we do with vintage.
You see a lot of other brands as well. After that, bringing in more kind of like relic guitars and such. So it's a
long.
A lot of folk interested.
it is a long-lasting fashion. You have to kind of wonder if it's going to be a fashion which will persist forever. I don't know, but to do serial production distressed guitars, each of which I have to say, because of the way they were done in production, were all very, very subtly different, and we encouraged the factory to do that, even though there's a lot of templates used when you do these kind of guitars. Yeah. It's turned into something quite interesting. Yeah, I'm so pleased that we were kind of there first. Yeah.
And obviously the connection in more recent times with Alan Entwistle and all the time you've also put in with.
Well, Alan Entwistle and Trev Wilkinson, they'll both kill me for saying this, are almost out of the same jelly mould. They're two English guys. They're from the same generation. A lot of people won't know that way back in the day, Trev and Alan actually had a music store together in Brisbane, I think it was, in Australia, for a little while. So they know each other really, really well. And where Trev went off to the States and did Wilkinson USA and developed loads of stuff there. And it was very kind of, I'd say focused on the Americana side of, the guitar world, if you know what I mean by that. Alan, because way back in the day, he worked with Burns. He was one of the Burns guys. And Trev's got a great interest in all guitars for sure, but Alan seems to me to have, and when we've spoken about it and when we developed the Revo range, he had more of a focus on some of the really wacky Italian stuff and the English stuff and some of that, what we call made in Japan kind of thing from the 70s, when they were really making some really interesting things. So when we got together with Alan, it was because we kind of nailed the vintage reissued and the vintage Icon stuff, and you bring new models in, you bring new colorways in, you bring new pickup configurations in. But if you want to create some different identity, it's a bit like why General Motors has more than one vehicle brand and more than one car brand. Yeah. You want to do this kind of style of stuff with a Chevy, you want to do this kind of stuff with a Dodge. So you do this kind of stuff with vintage reissued and vintage Icon, and then we want to go a bit left field. The world of modding exploded 5 or 6 years ago. And we're really kind of Revo. We wanted to go down that track of, if you were going to buy the guitar as a chassis and you were going to do this to it and change that and make this different and blah, 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 blah. That's really what Revo's about. Retro, vintage, originals. And Alan is as much fun to work with as Trev. Absolutely. And there was some guidance with things, but we kind of really left him to come up with his stuff, and he sits there in his Eagles Airy in the factory in China, dreaming up stuff, and everything that he's dreamt up for Revo, I think is quite wonderful. Actually, we've looked at some old English designs from the 60s, because of course in the 60s you couldn't buy a Strat or a Les Paul or a Telly, and I can use those words, which are all registered trademarks of Fender Music Instrument Corporation, Scottsdale, California. I have to say that. A C in a circle, You couldn't buy one of those, or even a G-style guitar, for virtually love nor money. 1965, buy a Fender Strat in the UK, red only, 295 guineas. That's the equivalent of about $8,000 now, if you could even get one. So there were English companies making guitars in the style. And one of those companies made a fabulous semi-acoustic, like a 335 registered trademark Gibson, blah blah blah. So we've modelled our Supreme guitar in vintage Revo on that English guitar from the 60s. So there's a kind of story and a provenance to everything that we do.
I think it makes it more interesting.
I think it makes it much more interesting because, of course, we're all looking, all guitar brands, from the biggest to the smallest, we're all actually looking at A, what other people do, and B, what's in the back catalogue that everybody's forgotten about, and can we do it again? Because it's such a conservative market. It's when you stand on a trade show floor at an exhibition like NAMM with 100,000 people through it, you don't speak to all of them, obviously, because your ears are burn and you don't have no voice left. But they're all saying the same kind of thing. They're all looking at what was made in the 50s, what was made in the 60s, and what's the latest version of it. You bring out the all singing, all dancing, all new Synthax guitar, synthesizer, looks really weird, is a massively usable tool as a musical instrument. Everybody goes, don't want that.
There's some
so
interesting
Revo, you
stuff.
have, you're right, there is some really interesting stuff out there. That is starting to change a bit, I feel. But, so Revo was taking a look at some of the more left field stuff and making it playable for today, workable for today, attractive for today, and just different enough that people have got that guitar, that guitar, that guitar, that guitar, two of those actually, because they want one in different colours. But look at a Revo and say, I really like that, I can use that. And it's got great tone circuitry in it, and it's got really great pickups. And it works as a tool,
Yeah, that's the thing as well, the fact that it's all built with the same kind of ethos in terms of, I suppose we go back to it again, but like someone can play that on the biggest stage in the world confidently, sort of thing, but it's not costing you there to buy it.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, it's testament to that for certain.
I mean, the trick, and if you ever get the chance to talk to Trev, you'll hear Trev say this, if you can't make a great guitar for $5,000, give up. The trick is making a really great guitar for $500.
Yeah.
And that's what, with vintage, I mean, it's not always $500, sometimes it's $700 because, the price of this is different to that. But I'm just trying to, as a benchmark, if you can't make a fabulously expensive guitar and you've got tons of money to play with, give up.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's the kind of thread, if you like, that runs right through vintage.
Yeah. And I think in terms of, guitars over the years, there's been obviously artists like Graham Oliver, Major, Thomas Blug with signature models, to name a few. What do you reckon over the years has been your favourite signature model?
Well, favourite signature model. My favourite guitar model in vintage, all full stop, is the Thomas Blug V6, the V6 MRTB. For those of you who don't know Thomas, just YouTube him or Google him. He's one of the best guitar players in the world. He was, in 1985, he was voted by Fender European Strat Player of the Year. So, that's the kind of...
Strat King of Europe.
Strat King of Europe. He was the Strat King of Europe, yeah. So he's a lovely guy, very unassuming, just a peerless musician. And he's got this... I've known him since 1981, I think.
Right.
Saw him at the first trade show in Wembley in 1981, demonstrating for Hughes and Kettner way back then.
That's mad.
Long time. It's all, we're all getting so old, Can't wait to retire, actually. But, to digress, so Thomas has got this, in our little industry, in our little group of players and aficionados and raconteurs, not raconteurs, I don't mean raconteurs, I said aficionado, didn't I?
Oh,
yeah, that's what I mean. People that know stuff, He's got this famous 61 Strat, which is his absolute baby. He's had it to bits, he's modded it, he's put it back together again, da-da-da-da-da. And he knows how to work that guitar. And I've always been friends with him, as I said, 1981. And we were developing the Icon line. And I said to Trev, Thomas would be a great guy to do a guitar with. But he's really, really fussy. So we agreed that it'd be nice to do it. So one Frankfurt show, big Frankfurt shows, we used to do all the big music shows in Germany. JHS had their little booth here. Hughes and Kettner got their little booth here. Thomas has got all his amps ready for demo. He's left his 61 Strat on the booth and walked away. This guitar is worth 25 grand, if it's worth a penny.
It's a big move.
So Trev and I have been prepping this sample, which we'll show you a picture of later on. We've been prepping this sample because we wanted to work with the Hughes and Hepner guys in Germany, as our distributor for vintage. So Trevor and I wanted to prove the point to their main guitar guy, Thomas, that we could make a guitar they'd be proud to sell. So we've made this copy of Thomas's fabulous 61. So he's left the booth to go and get a coffee. I run down and I steal it, and I replace it. I replace it with this analogue of his wonderful guitar that Trev's put together really quickly in the workshop. And I'm standing looking up the corner of the booth, looking up the aisle as Thomas walks back. And I've never seen the blood drain from anybody's face so quickly as he realised somebody had stolen his prized 61 and replaced it with this other guitar.
Surprised you didn't just scream.
Well, it wasn't a scream, but to watch him looking up and down the aisle saying, WTF, 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 was very, very funny. But then I held out his guitar like this, and I walked down and we started a conversation. I explained why we'd done it, but it was a funny moment. But the upshot of that is, we spent a lot of time with Thomas in the workshop in Southport with Trev, literally taking his guitar to bits and dimensioning every aspect of it, understanding how it worked, because there is some interesting trickery in there with what we came to call the buckle switch, which is the switch which takes away the dummy coil that is the heart and soul of the guitar. And then it took us over a year with backwards and forwards and with samples and getting pickup manufacturers to actually understand what we wanted to do and what Thomas wanted to do rather than what they wanted to do, because that's what they normally do. And we said, we're not interested in what you normally do, this is what you're going to do. To get the guitar, and we put it out into the market, and it was like an instant hit.
Yeah, and still today.
And today it is actually around the world, it is one of the most recognisable vintage Icon series guitars, along with its really nice thing that we can't call the Monterey version, because somebody else calls it that. So we call ours the Summer of Love, which was what Monterey was. And boy, was it fun! Well, I can tell you that personally, because I was there.
Must have been that. So, yeah. I think that obviously it's your favourite vintage. One of the things I'm curious about though, with the more recent introduction of the Pro Shop, is firstly, it's amazing, and I can say that hand on heart because I've got my own Pro Shop. The whole process from going online, filling in your form to get what you want to actually have as a guitar, filling in the specs you want, to getting a reply with your price and your quote, agreeing to go ahead with it, paying your deposit, you get updates, to say here's, how this is getting on. I didn't get any distressing on mine, but I know that even down, you'll not get an update necessarily every single week, but even at that, you'll get an update to say, listen, here's how the distressing's going, is this where you want it? Do you want a bit more sort of thing? Rather than going all out and going, what happened to that? So it's the level of care and detail taken with that sort of thing has been fantastic. And I think it's just ridiculous how you can get away with such reasonable prices for basically what is a custom shop guitar, because I've had a look at, and won't name names, but I've had a look at other, companies in their custom shops and went, what's left of my hair would fall out with the prices you're getting quoted, so it's amazing. But if you had to take a trip on the website yourself and fill in the form, what would you get as your own kind of Dennis Drumm Pro Shop?
Oh, it'd be a 52p bass, slab edge, right pickup, right bridge, absolutely essential. That's a difficult one to get, and probably a level of we have many levels of distressing that we talk about. There's lightly distressed, heavily distressed, very heavily distressed, and then the most extreme is crying your eyes out. You can't be any more distressed than crying your eyes out, and I'd have that level of distressing on it, because that's the kind of look I like on a guitar from that. It's 51. That'd be actually older than me, so it would be beat to shit, and it'd look great, and it'd play great as well. Yeah.
Used and abused.
Used and abused. Not unlike yourself, Graham.
You said you wouldn't be telling them. I think that would be. I think that would be pretty cool. What kind of colour would you go for?
Oh, it's just got to be. It's just got to be cream. Butterscotch, yeah. Faded, beat up butterscotch, yeah.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
So, with the Pro Shop side of things, obviously we know what you would like in terms of the bass sort of style. But how did the Pro Shop come about in the first place?
How did the Pro Shop come about? How did the Pro Shop come about in the first place? Well, it's kind of a two-pronged thing. Our American distributor, a company called RBI in Texas, they are a very, very guitar-focused company. The guys that manage and own that company, we go all the way back with them to the mid-'80s and the whole Jackson Charvel thing. Because at the time we were the Jackson Charvel distributor, and we used to go over and see them and the people at the top of that company then and the people at the top of RBI now. So they completely get serious guitars. And in the US, they had a program which they called artist guitars.
Okay.
And these guitars were vintage guitars that an artist would come along. It says stock vintage chassis. But an artist would come along and say, I love the guitar, I love the way it plays, I love the way it feels, I love the brand, I love the ethic, I love the fact you're poking people in the face with what you're doing, but actually I'd like some Seymours on it, and can you put a different vibrato on there for me? And they've got geniuses over there. I mean, people like, if you want to look at a guy called Kevin Easton. Kevin Easton was Jackson Charvel's like super #1 setup guy and tech back in the day in the 80s, and he works with RBI now, and he's the guy that does a lot of the artist guitars. Rick Taylor at RBI, their product manager, died in the wall guitar guy, amazing Nashville session bass player, married to a lovely lady who writes #1 country hits. Real musicians really get the plot, and they did a lot of these artist guitars for people like Phil Schaus and the guys in a lot of the Nashville bands. They've got hundreds and hundreds of artists now. So many I don't actually know who a lot of them are. In the country field and the rock field. And we kind of looked at that and thought, well, that's a great program. And over the years, our guys in our service department here at JHS Vintage, who are very, very skilled, between the guys over there, they've got like nearly 100 years of experience in building and fettling, and they are builders. They're not just repairers, they're builders, and they know their shit. So we thought, let's do some of that. So we started off with Pro Shop by doing really what we now refer to as uniques. Yeah. We'd say to the guys in the workshop, here's some chassis, do what you like to them, put what you like on them. Make some stuff that makes everybody go, oh! And they did. And that started off very, very cottage industry, very sort of, low level, 1 or 2 guitars, 2 or 3 guitars. We then, that kind of coincided with us doing the Vintage brand website. Don't know if you've seen that. You've got everything's on jhs.co.uk. You've also got Vintage Guitars R Us, which is where Vintage lives internationally. So because we were doing that, we thought, okay, we'll include a Pro Shop tab in there. So we posted some of these guitars that the guys had built early on. Gone. We thought, ooh, that's quite good. So then we developed the Pro Shop methodology, if you like, into uniques, where the guys will make something that they'll literally probably only ever make one of identical to that. Then we had what we call custom build, which is what people are now doing, like Graham's done, where they'll say to us, here's my spec, can you build that guitar for me? And that's now in quite high volume, and they're all genuinely handmade in the UK, custom built guitars using all the same techniques that a lot of other companies use. And as Graham referenced a little while ago, there's a lot of money changes hands for some of these things, but I come back to the thread that runs through Vintage, and we talk about value, and usually when you talk about value, you talk about something being really inexpensive, but you can have value at all sorts of prices. And if you've got a musical instrument, a guitar that's handmade in the UK, and it might have Seymours on it, or it might have any brand you like, it might have EMGs on it, it might have bare knuckles on it, it might have anything. We might have put, any vibrato that you can think of, or cosmetics it up, or done it in nitro instead of poly. It doesn't really matter what it is. And you finish up with a guitar that's, say, £1,200, £1,300, £900. There's a price range going on there for what we generally do with.
Yeah, it depends what you're after.
What we generally do with Pro Shop, and they're peerless guitars. They're handmade one-offs, made by very, very skilled people. And just as with a Vintage V52 Icon series, which you're going to buy for something like £400 in the UK or less, that will stand up against that other guitar that's made in the US, is 4 times that price.
Easily.
My attitude to that as the vintage guy is that if we can produce that kind of stuff, make a massive statement, and make people happy at a price that they're really happy with, and give them something unique or really interesting, or they've built themselves, or they've designed and put together themselves, everybody should be happy. Everyone's a winner. You know, winner, winner, chicken dinner. That's really what Vintage Pro Shop is about.
I think that's definitely it, especially because, like I say, it's not to criticise other companies for the way they do things, but when you do go onto like some of the kind of custom build websites and such, and kind of have a tinker with your spec and see what you want to get, obviously like sometimes like 2, 3, 4 grand easily.
Well, absolutely, very easily, yeah.
But to be able to get something for comparatively a fraction, which is the standard guitar, which you would be paying for anyway, with all the modifications that you're paying for anyway, to get the people that are going to make the changes to it, which obviously has the hourly rate for the labour and all the rest of it, to still get something back at such a fair price is really something, and that's the big thing for me that I like about Vintage with JHS, just the whole way that they have the players at the heart of what they're doing.
Well, we are. We're, Graham, it's right what you say. We are a business, but I'm a guitar guy through and through. Our MD Paul Smith is a guitar guy through and through. We work with people like Trev and Alan, who are guitar guys through and through. We're not just making stuff just purely. Well, we are here to make money. Obviously, it's a business, but it's we understand. We're all players as well. We've all been there. We all know what works, and that whether it's Pro Shop or whether it's Coaster. Or even whether it's Encore, actually, it's so difficult to make the lowest cost guitars and put them into people's hands, and they go, "Oh, this is really good." But I think and you touch on an interesting point as well, because you say taking a standard guitar and doing A, B, and C to it. Yeah. Well, there's 2 ways we approach Pro Shop. Okay. We'll either take a standard guitar, and somebody might want to change the pickups or change the vibrato, put different tuners on, blah blah blah, and then we'll work what I call backwards from that. Okay. Or depending, if somebody, for example, like we've done a nitro finish guitar for you, okay, because that's a whole separate thing working with nitro. For a nitro guitar, we'll start with a body blank and a neck and blah blah blah, and we'll actually build a fresh guitar up that way rather than working backwards from something stock. Yeah. So there's 2 ways to approach it. Yeah,
that makes sense.
So I hope that tells you what you need to know about how we got with Pro Shop.
No, for sure, because it's one of these things I know some folk in the group have been certainly asking about. You've very kindly allowed us to ask a couple of questions from the folk in the Vintage Guitar Players group. So
have I?
So
I'll read some of the stuff. on the Facebook page. I mean, hope it's not too deep.
The face of instant regret. So just to be really super cheeky, it's a 2-part question. Mm-hmm. So one of the parts I think might be a little late to the party now, that we'll a little touch after NAMM. Mm-hmm. But the first part, I suppose, is kind of going. This question, by the way, is from Sean Chandler, so thanks for that, Sean. The first one is basically, there is obviously, as we kind of talked about, a kind of a brand hierarchy. There's a number of different brands owned under JHS. Mm-hmm. It's effectively asking, would you ever kind of down the line consolidate anything or reduce the kind of number of brands, or do you see, I suppose, there's a place for everything within the different markets?
That's a very deep commercial question. Isn't it? What should we do with that one? Okay, so we've told the story about where Vintage came from and how Encore was first. Ever since we introduced the Encore brand name, I think in 1989 or 1988, the first ones were, it's laid itself a solid basis of being a reliable, good, playable, first-time buyer's guitar. So when you have a brand that's in the marketplace for that time, one of the most important attributes of any brand actually is trust. Does it do what it says on the tin? Can I rely on it? And Encore has always been a very, very, very reliable guitar. So as a brand, you don't really want to mess with that. So that's why Encore still exists to this day. But it also gives us the basis of a step program, where we have Encore, we have Vintage Coaster, which I'll come back to. We have Vintage and its various series. We've got Reissued, Icon, Revo, and Jodo, the limited edition ones, which we've not really touched on. And then above that, we have the Fret King line, which is a much, much more premium line. So Fret King, vintage coaster. Encore is the way it all works. Having said that, it's an interesting question because we have found lately that we're kind of reaching a decision where, for example, you guys might not know we have a ukulele brand, a big ukulele brand called Laka. Laka, by the way, is the Hawaiian princess of the dance. You can look it all up. Big history there. God. That will become the Vintage Laka series because we want to incorporate that into the brand because it just makes more, coherence, more sense. We also have a folk brand called Pilgrim, and that will eventually become subsumed into Vintage, and it will become the Vintage Pilgrim series. So that might answer the question. That's why there are different brand names.
I think as well, it's probably a good point because it's not necessarily as straightforward as like with some companies that maybe do, I don't know, like ESP, you've got like E2, ESP, USA, LTD, that sort of thing. And it's about price because there's more to it because you've got, like, well, they all are, probably in the same sort of ballpark cost-wise for the equipment and the hardware and the finish, but they are very different looking because you've got like the Revo series where they all look kind of like they've got their own kind of thing.
They've got their own identity.
So
that's absolutely what we want.
So I think it's probably it. And with the Coaster series, obviously, as well, one of the more.
Yeah, we didn't really touch on Coaster, but Coaster was another interesting one. We always try and do things with a purpose. And the most important musical instrument that anybody ever buys really is their first one. Doesn't matter if it's a flute, a clarinet, a drum set or a guitar, it really doesn't matter. So with Coaster, and again to give you guys some context, and this is a little bit commercial, prices of everything, every single commodity in the world rocketed between 2018 and 2022. We all know what went on with COVID and blah blah blah. So there were big price shifts. Encore grew out of its space, so we had to do something about that. And the upshot of that was the Vintage Coaster series. Vintage Coaster is all about real value, super playability, and really super affordability. But what we were absolutely keen to do was avoid the pitfalls that normally come about at the low end on electric guitars, and that's pickups. So the first thing we did was we got our mate Alan, the genius with pickups, Alan Entwistle, to design a range of pickups specifically for the Coaster guitars. We don't use them anywhere else, but if you pick up a Coaster V60 and give it to the best double cut bolt neck player you can find, he or she will say, wow, this is a great sounding guitar. Yeah. We went to the trouble, the low end of the guitar world the guitar market is usually, you don't really know what timbers you're using. It could be a laminate going this way, it could be a laminate going this way, it could be MDF, it can be lots and lots of different, inexpensive materials. We chose to find a timber that is actually a tone wood, and let's not go down that rabbit hole of tone wood because that's an entire different conversation. There are no such things. There are no such things as tone woods, as we all know. Yeah. They're all woods that we have come to be using for the last 50 years with a particular tonality, and we now call them tone woods. I digress. So we even found a timber that had been used in China, where the guitars are manufactured, in a musical instrument called a guzheng, played in the tea houses by beautiful ladies, soundboard of which is made from a timber they call wutan in China. It's actually Powellina wood, and we use this Powellina wood for the bodies on all the bolt neck guitars in the Vintage Coaster series, because A, it's light, suits the young person that's usually going to buy it, but more importantly than that, it's super resonant, to the extent where it's got a lovely tap tone that people look for in a high-end guitar. It adds so much to the tonality of the guitar, and we're using decent maple for the necks, as I say, Alan's pickups, and as a tool, it works irrespective of the price. And that thread runs throughout the entire thing that we do with fretty musical instruments. We're never trying to save. We're never trying to save money. We're just trying to make the best tool, really.
It's an invaluable ethos for the players.
So I think so. Yeah.
Well, in wrapping up, then the other part of that question. This is the bit that I think might be...
Who was that question from, by the way?
It's from Sean Chandler.
I hope that answered your question, Sean.
I think it did. The other part is just if there's anything that we reckon we're going to see in the pipeline that's going to surprise us. Some stuff from the Revo series, for example. We're a bit late to the party because NAMM's just happened, and good grief, we had a lot of.
Well, we did, yeah. Is there going to be anything new? Well, there's always going to be something new, and there is stuff in the pipeline that we can't tell you about. But really, I think at the moment we're just going to have a rest because it took us over 2 years to get that Revo program together. We launched it in 2 tranches. We launched it at NAM 25 and NAM 24.
Yeah.
We need to let that settle down in all the markets now. It's getting great press. It's getting great YouTube. It's getting great Instagram. Lovely comments on Facebook. People seem to like it. It seems to have hit a spot. But as to anything new, I've got to say, as we sit here today in an interview and say, there's nothing to talk to you about at the moment, but
As always, watch this space.
as watch this space, as they say, yeah.
Perfect. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time today, Dennis. It's been an absolute pleasure to come down here to the first time down to head office and see the room of treats with all the 30th
anniversary, yes,
and all
yes,
sorts of samples that are just hiding about different places that
there's
you can't see, but trust me, they're really cool.
there are things that you'll see today that will have to kill you if you tell anybody about it. But
So, my lips are sealed.
Yeah.
Listen, but thank you so much.
thanks, Graham. Absolute pleasure.